All right, coming to you live from Atlanta and Chicago area. It's the Movie Changeup podcast, specifically our Disney Plus weekly review, where each week we kind of break down some of the episodes or movies that dropped this week on Disney Plus. It's our June 26th, 2021 episode. We had an episode of Loki, an episode of The Bad Batch, and because Monsters at Work comes out next week or the week after, we're going to talk about Monsters Inc. Because there weren't any movie drops this week, and we always kind of like to talk about at least one movie, so we decided to talk about Monsters Inc. Tristan, what were your overall thoughts for Disney Plus this week? It felt like a lot of episodes dealing with backstory and a lot of information dump episodes.
Yeah, a lot of okay, let's slow down for a second and explain what's going on to people. But I kind of liked it. I think Bad Batch was a bit better than Loki for me. I think Loki was a more significant step down, but we'll talk about that. I still thought both were really good episodes, but I was really impressed by Bad Batch. I was a bit let down by Loki, and I'm really, really excited to talk about Monsters Inc. And I want to talk for a second at the end too about what I think might be the best show on TV right now, but I'll save that
Superman
to
and
the end.
Lois.
We'll see.
All
I'll
right.
get there.
Well, for me, it's Superman and Lois. Even though this is not a CW discussion, Superman and Lois is the show I'm hyped about most right now. Besides Sexy Beasts, which is coming to Netflix, which looks incredible. If you haven't seen the trailer for Sexy Beasts, definitely check that out if you're a fan of trash reality television. But all right, let's start with Loki. The episode was called Lamentis. Tristan, you're usually our note taker. We wanna do just to kind of what were your kind of general thoughts, I guess, on Lamentis?
I thought it was an interesting turn for the show. I thought for sure we'd go through this portal and go to some crazy like multiverse version of the MCU. Maybe we'd see some weird version of Loki or something like that. But then we went through the portal and we got to Doctor Who, and it was this weird like sci-fi adventure story from the writers of Rick and Morty in the world of the MCU. And I thought it was a fun ride, but a little bit of anxiety is coming up now. We only got like 4 episodes left at this point, and I think maybe might have slowed down a little bit too much in this episode.
I think after this episode we only have three left, so that might crank up your
That's
anxiety even
even
more.
worse, guys.
I think there's
Thanks for
six
that.
episodes total, so um,
It feels like every MCU show they're waiting for like, oh, there's that secret episode though. Like
mm.
Kevin Feige said 7 hours, so there's gonna be another episode of WandaVision. Then he's like, oh no, I was speaking generally, guys.
Yeah, I know. I think it was Tom Hiddleston said these next two episodes of Loki get crazy and completely change what the show is. So I'm curious to see how that works out. But yeah, after last episode, I fully expected them to go through a time portal and wind up in like this weird thing. And I think that at first they end up back at the TVA. Like I think when
Hmm.
Loki walks through that portal, they go back to the TVA, and then they end up on the moon Lamentis. But yeah,
Yeah, when they first, we'll get to that, but yeah,
I thought
I
it
was
was
about to
just
get some thoughts, but I'm gonna save it till we get to the scene.
I thought it was a fun episode. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I really it was like we talked about a minute ago. It was definitely an exposition heavy episode, but in a way that worked and made sense and didn't just feel like an exposition dump.
Hmm. If you're ready, I'm ready to get to the plot.
All right, yeah, let's break it down.
We open up, of course, with the Marvel titles. I like to note that every time because it feels very cinematic. I always get kind of chills when I'm like, wow, I'm really watching Marvel on TV right now.
Yeah.
And then we get right into Sylvie. It seems for a second like she's out with her, like a friend. It's just kind of a flashback just showing what's happening with Sylvie. That was what I was thinking for a moment. And then, of course, I recognize that she was out with the agent from the TVA, and this was some kind of mental interrogation and enchantment, if you will, where she was using this memory from the TVA agent to extract information about the timekeepers. What did you think of this interesting, trippy kind of opening?
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. Kind of an interesting new way to do things with the whole like tapping into someone's memory like that. I really liked it. I really liked her explanation too of like she goes in and like grabs their mind, and I thought that was kind of a cool explanation. And I like the opening where they go at the bar and she asks her a question. She doesn't quite get the answer she wants, or like the person is tipped off, so then she changes things like a little bit, and you could it almost felt like a dream. Like you're it
Hmm.
reminded me a little bit of Inception where they're talking, and then Cobb asks Elliot Page's character like, "Oh, how did we get here?" and then that's
Hmm.
when she starts to break down and realize like something is off, and that's kind of what it reminded me of.
Yeah, I like that time loop thing. I'm a sucker for time loops. I was almost theorizing Loki would be a time loop show, but we've
Yeah,
gotten too far for a loop at this
yeah,
point.
yeah,
That would be a little much. But all right, we get those Loki titles, and then like you said, we're back at the TVA. This portal that could take us anywhere just takes us back to where we just were before. But we get some cool action here. So Sylvie arrives and kind of fights these guards really intensely and uses their kind of like eraser stick things. I don't know what you call them,
yeah.
but she batons them into non-existence. And there's a kind of cool action scene right there. And of course, Loki kind of arrives after that and is a little bit confused. So what do you think of this opening sequence here?
Yeah, I thought it was fun and good action moment of Sylvie versus those guards. Kind of feel bad for the guards when you find out later on what they are, but
Yeah, they're being erased from existence at this point. That is pretty intense,
yeah,
and I think we see even compared to the Loki that we're seeing now, like this is a brutal version of Loki. Like even from the opening sequence, we've seen like, oh, these are powers that we haven't really seen Loki been able to master,
yeah,
and this is like a kind of violence we haven't even seen from Loki. So I think it's establishing the dynamics really interestingly from the very beginning.
yeah, for sure.
And they get this kind of banter once Loki and Sylvie reunite, where he's saying like, "Are you sure you're Loki? And can we really work together?" And they have this kind of quickly budding relationship where they're butting heads, but you can tell they're going on a path towards, if not friendship, at least acquaintanceship. Like they're going to be partners in crime by the end of the episode, and we get that arc through the episode here. But what do you think
Yeah.
of their first interaction here? As they kind of for the first time decide, okay, maybe we'll work together, and they get in that fight, and Loki grabs her time travel thing and kind of zaps them into this different portal.
Yeah, I really like it. They're slowly starting to learn about each other and figure out, each other's backstory, which I think will lean into my theory later on for what I think the future of the show is. It's hard for me because I only watched it once and it was a couple days ago to remember exactly like what conversation was when, but I really kind of like their whole dynamic and figuring out what makes her Loki different than his Loki.
Yeah, they kind of build the dynamic over the course of the episode, so I feel like we'll get to that like towards the end when they kind of give us the full scope of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought this was a cool scene. I like the action at the beginning, like you said, and I think from the very beginning we get a cool dynamic between these two characters. I think when you're replacing Owen Wilson with an actress that we don't really know very well, you have big shoes to fill. So I kind of felt like, oh, I wish it doesn't
Mm,
have the same level of spicy, like
yeah.
great top tier performing that I get out of Owen Wilson performances.
Yeah.
It wasn't as gripping as
Yeah.
that, but I'm really curious to see how the relationship grows. And
I'm
I
also
also thought it was kind of cool that Renslayer shows up for an action scene. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
I'm also sad the showrunner of Loki said we're not gonna get an Owen Wilson iconic wow in this
Oh, I
series.
did. I saw that. I was very ready for it. I thought for sure that if any show would give him that meta line, it would have to be Loki. But
Yeah,
I imagine
especially
Owen.
there's. I mean, we might. I'll bring it up because if you're watching our review, I assume you've seen Loki. When it's and we can talk about it more when we get to that moment in the show. But when it's revealed to uh, Mobius and Mobius that he is a variant and that he wasn't created by the Timekeepers, that would have been the perfect moment for him to drop the iconic "Wow." That's all I'll say.
My idea for the Owen Wilson wow was going to be in the finale. Mobius was going to finally get a chance. He's going to walk to a dock and see a jet ski sign from Loki, and he'll be like, "Oh wow!"
Yeah, that would have been good too.
But yeah, unfortunately, he's not even in the episode because they've gone. They were in the TVA for a second, but not long enough to see our
Yeah.
boy Mobius. I guess Owen Wilson didn't sign for that many episodes because Loki and I'm gonna call her Sylvie is going through a portal into a planet Lamentis 1, Cyberpunk 2077. They picked the year on purpose, I'm sure. In an apocalyptic event, uh, like we established last episode, she's hiding out in these apocalyptic events, and Loki kind of teleports her into a very chaotic one where the moon is about to crash into a planet. It's this very big sci-fi plot,
Mm.
and they have about 12 hours to get onto a ship to get out. That's kind of the premise of the episode. What do you think of this direction for the show to take here?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting. It gives us cool visuals. I was hoping for more of like an interesting world, I guess, than just like a simple like outer space type of thing that I could see in like any other futuristic type show. I thought with someone that worked on Rick and Morty and the whole budget and dynamic of the MCU, I was hoping for something I think a little bit more crazy and chaotic than just like, oh, the planet's crashing into this moon and we gotta get out. I was hoping for like this crazy, weird, alien like world, and it was just kind of generic sci-fi.
Yeah, I mentioned Doctor Who because it feels like Doctor Who, like they're on this very limited budget. So like, okay, they're on a base and the base is exploding into the moon and they're got a couple hours and they got to figure it out. It feels like that kind of a
Yeah,
premise where it's like, okay, throw them into this low budget kind of talk your way out of it at the last second situation. Uh, it fits for the Rick and Morty writers. That's kind of a I don't know what you call it, a structure they use a lot in that show. But yeah, I think it does feel kind of limited. I think the sets feel kind of limited. I would like to know if this was intentional, if they were going for like, oh, we're gonna make a B movie episode, and then I can kind of give them credit, like, oh, you pulled off like the low budget aesthetic of the sets. But if that wasn't what they were going for, then I think
yeah.
some of these sets looked a little bit weak.
Yeah, it could have been. It could have been better. That's all I'll say. I loved all the conversation. I loved all the dynamic between Sylvie and Loki in this episode, but just kind of the reason that's making that planet apocalyptic, or I guess that moon apocalyptic, is was just lacking for me.
Yep, and I want to mention, yeah, we'll get to that Loki Sylvie dynamic in a second here because we get, I don't know what you'd call it, an interesting scene between Loki and Sylvie here. I think we're really starting to bond them. Uh, but I wanted to point out that Sylvie has this line right here where she mentions like, "Oh, nobody makes it out of this apocalyptic event. It's like one of the worst ones," and it applied to me like maybe there's a bunch of variants who are surviving on the edge, like a bunch of people who are
Yeah,
like traveling along to these apocalyptic events, and it's not just her. If it's not a bunch of Lokis, maybe a bunch of other variants who are living on the edge of survival here.
yeah, yeah. I think that could be interesting if there's another one they go to, or maybe we'll see more of the people in this one if there's a place like a hidden place where variants hang out. It would be kind of interesting to see.
Hmm. And here we get, I think, the more interesting Loki and Sylvie scenes when they come upon this woman in a shack, and Sylvie and they had this short conversation where Loki's like, "Oh, you got to be tact, you got to be cunning," and Sylvie's kind of like the gung ho, go in for it kind of Loki, and she walks up to the door and bangs on it, and immediately gets shot away by this big gravity gun type thing.
Oh yeah, that was a great moment.
And then Loki, of course, thinking he's so much smarter than everybody else, sees a picture of her husband and impersonates her husband and walks in and tries to talk his way out of it. And of course, she doesn't buy that at all because her husband was an asshole and he hasn't been there for how many years. And she shoots him again with the gravity gun and he goes flying back and they both kind of failed. And I think that was a fun moment for them to kind of both see that, okay, we don't know what we're doing and we've been talking big game, but both of us are kind of bad at this.
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of interesting to see them both fail in different ways.
Yeah, I think that was the first big bonding moment for them. They kind of even shared like a little giggle together. And then we also get this scene where she starts trying to sort of enchant him,
Yeah,
and
we see. Yeah, I like that where Gashi, but it reminded me of the Star Wars thing of a Jedi mind trick, but and Obi Wan's like, oh, it only works on the weak minded, and Loki's like,
Loki's
I'm
just like,
not
I'm
weak
too big
minded.
brained.
Yeah,
I thought it was a very, I don't know what direction to be going on this podcast, Joe, but I'm feeling a sexual tension vibe between these two
okay,
characters.
yeah. For people that are essentially the same person, like, is this incest or masturbation if they fuck? That's what I want to know.
And are they even the same person? Because they're making it pretty obvious that, or they're like being very on the nose, like, are you really a Loki? And she's saying, oh, I'm not Loki now, I'm now Enchantress. And maybe they're not even the same person. I don't know. They have a shared history, but I'm very curious where their
Yeah, it
relationship
could
will
be
go
a
because I didn't expect
situation.
that.
It could be a situation of in her timeline of wherever she's from, Odin. Because I mean, Loki was adopted by Odin, right? So she could
Hmm.
maybe be adopted from a different place. Like Loki, I think was the part of like part frost giant and adopted by Odin. Maybe her character was adopted from like witches or something, and so she's just adopted from a different source named Loki, and they're not even like the same thing. It's not even like, oh, she's like from a timeline where the men are women and the women are men and she's just a female Loki. It's like she could be a completely different thing.
Yeah, I'm curious because I almost got a little bit of like maybe trans vibes or gender fluid vibes from the character because she mentioned like he called her Loki and she says, "Oh, don't call me that. I'm not Loki anymore. I'm Sylvie now." Like that. That kind of line
Yeah,
implies to me like, oh, maybe there's a history of like,
yeah,
oh, she was born assigned male at birth and eventually decided to
yeah.
literally transform her body into her female form, and that would have been an interesting origin story. I'm sure they
Uh,
won't dive into that deeply. We'll get even more to that, ironically, later on. But it's
uh,
this interestingly progressive move for Marvel
yeah.
this episode as a whole.
And there was the whole thing of when Loki was checked in the first episode that his gender, I think, was assigned like gender fluid or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely what I got from the Sylvie vibes here. Especially the actress mentioned some stuff on Twitter, of course, that's like metatextual, but I think she reads the character as that. Let me get past that line here. They're looking for power. Now they got to kind of power up her very almost Star Wars vibes, even like it was very sci-fi in this episode. But they find this train to train out of this exploding planet, like a very Snowpiercer premise, where they're like, "Oh, the rich get on, the poor don't. We got to sneak our way
Yeah.
onto this train to get off of this planet at the last second because our transponder teleporter thing is dead. So we got to get off
Or is it?
legit." Or is it? It is Lucky just playing games. Who knows? But I want to get your thoughts on this Snowpiercer premise. They're really mashing a bunch of sci-fi stuff together in this episode.
Yeah, it's like Western, but also like modern, and I like the vibe of it. Of like, oh, there's this train, and we got to get on this train because it has the power we need to recharge our, basically our time machine. Which
hmm
also you could argue is a little bit of Back to the Future 3 vibes, and
Very true. There's a lot thrown into the episode, and I mentioned Rick and Morty a lot this episode, but this feels very much Rick and Morty. The first two didn't feel like that at all, really, but
yeah,
this feels like a Rick and Morty episode.
yeah. Yeah, I like that, and I like again their whole different aspect or different ways to get on the train, where Loki just impersonates one of the
hmm
like guards essentially and gets her on.
Yeah, once again, we get that kind of conflict where Sylvie tried her way at the shack, and Loki says, "Okay, I'm going to try my Loki way," and it almost works for him, but of course, Sylvie has to do a little magic herself to get them on at the end. First time I think we've seen them actually work together.
Yeah, for sure, definitely.
I think this is a more interesting visually location. Like this train is much more interesting than where they just were at in this like ramshack mining cart thing.
Yeah,
And I was like, oh, this is like a $10 set. And this one feels like, okay, they spent like a few thousand on this green screen here.
yeah, I was definitely getting some like Last Jedi Canto Bite vibes from inside that train.
hmm And I think this is definitely the scene to talk about when we get this conversation, the sit down conversation between Loki and Sylvie. I have a little bit of a breakdown here. We can get into more detail though. But Loki mentions he was adopted, and Sylvie kind of pauses for a second, and he says, "Oh, is that like a spoiler for you?" And she says, "Oh no, I always knew that. They didn't keep that from me at all. That was just a thing that I knew." And that's a pretty divergent moment. I think Loki felt
Yeah,
very betrayed in that moment when he found out that his father and his hid that from him his whole life, and that's kind of a defining moment for him and his character.
yeah, and I like it. I kind of like they were like it shows how good like the writing and the performances is, where you see like the differences in their background without them ever expressly saying it. Like it's very clear that Sylvie's mom just never existed or
hmm
died early in her life or just wasn't around early in her life because when she asked him, "Oh, how do you learn magic?" and Loki's like, "Oh, my mother taught me," and Sylvie would basically kind of had this somber, sad look, and she's like, "Oh, I had to teach myself."
Yeah, Loki has these very fond memories of his mother, and he kind of goes on a little bit talking to Sylvie, and assume is an emotionally honest moment from Loki where we get like he really felt for his mother. He felt like she was a good person. And he really cared about her, and you can tell it hurt because he now knows that she died, and in a very direct way, it was his fault, and he didn't even
Yeah,
know. He this Loki didn't do that, but he knows that he did. In a way.
yeah, like in the
I think that's a
future,
very
kind of.
complex. emotional dynamic to portray. And I think Tom Hiddleston is really impressing me on this show that he can portray so much of that complex thought.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's kind of like this interesting dynamic of like you didn't kill your mom, but you watched a video of you killing her in the future, but it's not really your future anymore. It's a different alternate future. Like it's definitely still gonna mess you up.
Yeah, and you want to say like, "Oh, I wouldn't do that," but you know that you would. Like you know that if you stayed upon the path you were on, that's what you would have done.
Yeah. Yeah, he basically was there when his dad died. He, helped facilitate his mom's death, and then he ultimately like died by Thanos.
And to get, I think the theme of the episode, or the theme of might even be a theme of the series in this relationship here is what love means. And Loki kind of says maybe love is hate, or is it mischief, or later is it a reflective fake knife, or maybe it's just something that I need a few more drinks here to talk about. But I think that's very complex and interesting. Loki loved his mother, and yet he fought against her wishes. And Loki, I think we see that he loved Asgard, but he fought for the destruction of Asgard. And I think Loki loves his brother, but he fights against his brother. And I think that's really fascinating. And they really dive into Loki's character in this episode and in this series in a way that I didn't see much out of Loki. I was like, oh, he's just the Tom Hiddleston British bad guy, and he was good
Yeah.
in the first Thor, and he kind of slowly but surely lost his luster for me. And I think this is bringing a lot of it back, and I'm really liking this dynamic already.
Yeah, I'm liking a lot of what I'm seeing from Loki. Was never a character that I really cared about at all, and it's definitely making me enjoy the character more and the more nuances of the character.
And now we get what I think is going to be the debate of the episode. Loki and Sylvie have this moment, and they connect, and Sylvie takes a little nap. She wakes up, and Loki is real drunk, and he's singing an Asgardian tune, dancing around with the locals, totally giving himself away. Uh, and my question here comes in: Is Loki legit drunk? Well, I don't want to skip over some establishing moments here. I want to get a second here. Of course, the scene of the episode, Loki is bi, I assume, or pansexual in some way because
Yeah,
he mentions they have, oh, was there a prince or a princess maybe in your past? And Loki pauses for a second and says, oh, a little bit of both. I assume the same as you, and she kind of confirms that. So I think it's a interesting confirmation.
yeah,
Loki in the comics has been a pansexual character for a while, and I believe the MCU version of Loki seems to be either bi or some form of
yeah.
pansexual, some kind of
Well, it should
not not heterosexual.
it shouldn't be surprising because in Norse mythology and in Marvel mythology, the wolf from well, at least Marvel Comics mythology and Norse mythology, the wolf from like the giant wolf that is Hela's pet in Ragnarok is Loki's son. So Loki will, is attracted to and will fuck anything. So the fact that he's like pansexual or bisexual or anything, not that surprising.
No, and I think it's fun. More Disney as a whole has been like weirdly resistant in
Mm,
including any not straight people at all in their movies. Like they'll be like, "Oh, this is a very queer moment," and then it's like a background shot of the guy in Beauty and the Beast like dancing with another guy, or there's like these very very vaguely
yeah.
queer things in their movies, or queer
Like I think
coded
it's
villains in the animated shows, and I think this is a very big step forward for Disney, even if it's not that big of a step forward.
yeah,
Like it's, oh, one of their characters is bi once,
yeah,
but it's like for Disney that's a lot. Okay,
yeah, for sure.
let me get back to the notes there, but that's definitely something people are talking about, especially during Pride Month. It feels very
Yeah,
timed. I think that they were like, oh, it's Pride Month, let's give some positive gay
yeah,
vibes out into the wilderness here. But yeah, we'll get to that now where Loki also mentions a bit of his past. He says she kind of questions him a bit about like any past loves, and he pauses and says like, "Oh, that's something I might have to drink more to talk about." And I'm kind of trying to think maybe they're gonna give us an origin story of some like tragic love that Loki had in his
yeah,
past that broke his heart, or some kind of like Snape origin story where it's like, oh, Loki had this like really sad childhood where his heart was broken by someone, and give him a little bit of an extra extra development in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought we were gonna get that, but apparently not. Maybe in a later episode. But there's only three left, so who knows?
But yeah, Tom Hiddleston says they're getting crazy, so I imagine we'll get into like some kind of origins of Loki type thing. But yeah, we'll get to theories in a bit. We're starting to drag on this section already, but I was happy to see it. Of course, I mentioned Loki drank too much and is singing this Asgardian song about his lost love, and Sylvie is not very happy about it. Loki's pretty much given away their entire plan. He's lost his disguise, and the guards come in kind of demanding Loki to show his tickets, and he isn't able to do it, of course, because they faked their way on. And we get yet another cool action scene on this train here. Loki versus these guards to some pretty cool music, even if the action isn't as good as the rest of the action of the episode.
No. Yeah, I liked it. The action was maybe not as great as it had been, but the one thing I've been curious about is like Loki's this like god of mischief that can procure anything. Why can't he just fake some tickets?
Yep. And I wonder if he was trying to at the end, but he couldn't get it up. Essentially, like
Yeah.
he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna do it," and then it was just sparks.
Yeah, that's possible.
But I also wonder if Loki is kind of playing a game this whole time and he's not actually drunk at all.
Yeah.
But
Can gods get drunk? That's what I want to know.
yeah, because I imagine Loki's trying to play some games over Sylvie, and Sylvie's playing games over Loki still. And I think even though they're emotionally honest in the episode, I do think there's some games being played by Loki here. I can't imagine that. Otherwise, it feels like a dumb move from Loki. Like, why would Loki? Loki doesn't seem like a character who'd drink too much and fuck up the plan like that. Like, he's a god of mischief, but he's not like he doesn't make
He's not dumb.
massive
Yeah.
mistakes like that. He's not an idiot.
Yeah, he's not that dumb.
Okay, Loki and Sylvie get blown from the train. They fly out into the desert here, and now they're pretty much screwed. Sylvie's had enough of Loki's bullshit and insists on getting the time thing back, but it's broken. Loki says, "Oh, I'm hedonistic. That's what I do." And she says, "Oh, I'm hedonistic, but I'm not an idiot like this version of Loki who is written bad, or maybe has a plan." I don't
Yeah.
know. And then Loki says, "Oh, who cares? Plan doesn't matter because they're never going to beat the TVA. Who even cares?" And Sylvie lets out this big angry scream that I feel like is me every time I get confused about the writing in an MCU show.
Yeah.
So Loki feels bad for Sylvie and offers an alternative plan. They're going to hijack the Ark itself and escape. It crashed, sure, but timeline be damned. Not when we're on it. We're going to save the day and get out in time. So, what do you think of the second plan from Loki? Do you buy the emotional dynamics of the scene? Do you think Loki's faking it? What's going on here, Joe?
So I mean, I know we normally save theories to the end, but it's basically the end. My theory is one of them is faking something, but at what point did the faking start? I don't know. But I think we're gonna find out like mid. They're gonna accomplish it. They're gonna get the. I think at some point, as the train is taking off, one of them is gonna reveal something to the other, and the other person is going to reveal it was all a ruse, and that maybe they're even still back at the TVA, and like Lamentis 1 isn't real. They were never on Lamentis 1, or like my thinking is that the broken thing that like whatever it's called, basically their little time machine thing that
Mm-hmm.
Loki showed Sylvie wasn't the real one, and it was a fake broken one that Loki showed to Sylvie just to like get her to go with his plan.
Yeah, it's an interesting direction. I think I like that. Like maybe this isn't even happening at all, and there's some kind of projection or enchanting going on. Maybe Loki's all been enchanted this whole time since the moment the episode started, or something like that. But that would be an interesting move. I don't know what they'll do with that, but I think that's a good theory. I'm
Yeah.
starting to roll with that in my head now.
What
But
was your theory?
because I wasn't sure where to go with it. I was just wondering, is Loki just faking this all along? Does he really have the real time keep or whatever they call it, and he's just trying to get something out of Sylvie? But I don't know what direction to go with this because the other answer is that they just wrote Loki bad this episode,
Yeah, I mean
and
that's always a possibility. Like that's the one basis of fan theories when people try to explain stuff. It's like there's always the possibility of bad writing. Like
because
maybe this is this, and then or they just wrote it bad.
we've done that plenty of times in this MCU run alone. Like we'll be like, oh, Peter Petro is in the is actually the Quicksilver from the X-Men universe, and he's played by Evan Peters, so he's got to be a multiverse. And then
Nope,
it's just like, oh nope,
Ralph Boner.
actually no. And I feel like I don't want to get too wired up in these fan theories because I do wonder like first two episodes are what hit the critics, and they're really proud of these two episodes, and then they knew the third one's a bit of a step down, so they were like, okay, let's save that for one of theirs, and it could just be bad writing or it could be intentional, and I think we'll find out next week because they're dragging it out a bit, but we'll get to. I want to go a bit through this. I do. My theory at this point, though, is that Loki is faking this and that he didn't actually drink too much, or
Yeah.
he actually does have a tragic backstory love, and we're gonna find out that's why he drank so much because he doesn't really think about his past love, but he finally did one time, and it was what threw him off the plan and made him do all these terrible mistakes because he wasn't used to thinking about them.
Yeah. Do you have a theory for Beyond? Maybe next episode or that plot line? Because I have one.
Let's save that to the end. I want to get through a
Okay.
couple
Okay.
sentences here, the last bit here. We get a cool exchange here where Loki kind of explains a bit of his story to Sylvie, and she says, "Wow, that's a pretty good life." And Loki says, "Sorry you missed it." I think that's a kind of cool quip. Like there are these two characters who were on like opposing paths, and Loki has this line of like, "Sorry you missed it." Like maybe she could have gotten it if she had a couple like a different chance of fate. She would have been him, you know.
Yeah.
And then Loki demands details of what Sylvie's powers actually are, what's enchantment, what's even going on here, and she reveals a bit of what it's like, gives some kind of metaphor, but then she drops more interesting detail that I think is what we got to get in before we start going on theories, which is that every agent in the TVA is actually a variant. They are taken from the timelines, I assume, and erased, and now they serve as agents of the TVA, including Mobius, including Rengrave, I assume, including
Yeah.
everybody at that place. The guy who didn't know what a fish was, maybe that's why I didn't know what a fish was. I
What if we
mentioned
find
it
out
in
he
the
was like a fisherman?
that would be hilarious. And they just completely erased fish specifically from his memory. They're like, "You've forgotten fish."
Yeah.
Maybe he's the guy with the jet ski, you know?
Yeah. So like Mobius is definitely like had a jet ski back in the day.
That's what I'm thinking. Or he died in a jet ski accident or something.
Yeah, I've also I've seen the theory that like what if Mobius is actually just like Owen Wilson, like an Owen Wilson remnant, and they like brainwashed him, and now he's like this guy, Mobius and
That would be so
Mobius.
funny. That's when you get the oh wow though. You get back to Owen Wilson on set, and his first line of the scene he walks onto is just oh wow.
Oh wow, wow.
That would be good. But unfortunately, I mean, who knows? The writers have just lied to us too
Yeah,
before, so.
maybe to hide the most iconic moment in the show, Owen
Yep.
Wilson
It
saying
turns out
"Wow."
he's the timekeeper. He's Kang. What do they call it? What's that
Kang the
guy that they're
Conqueror.
theorizing? Kang the Conqueror is gonna be. Yeah, it's actually Owen Wilson's playing Kang the Conqueror. They
Yeah.
fired the guy
Mm.
from Lovecraft
Yeah,
Country.
yeah, I'm sure that's gonna go over well. Yeah, we fired like this up and coming black guy and replaced him with fucking Owen Wilson. Can't wait to see that response on Twitter.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And then the last shot we get essentially is this real fake, but also cool one shot of them arriving into the cyber city and looking up at the arc taking off, and they're like, "Oh God, we got like
Yeah,
however many seconds we got to run." So they get like a nice one shot running through the city, cutting through all these buildings, and of course, if I mean the cuts are there,
no,
but it looks smooth enough that it can fool the eye, and you just watch along, and it's pretty cool. And I
no,
like seeing some ambitious like most of the time Marvel movies are shot really flatly and don't really have a lot of like big dynamic anything, and I think it's
yeah,
cool to see a big one shot take and maybe even a nice throwback to those old Netflix shows that used to love doing their hallway one takes.
yeah. That those shows were bad except one show.
Yeah,
Everyone Daredevil came out and everyone was like, "This show's amazing," and then all the other shows would come out and be like, "Maybe it'll be as good as Daredevil," and it never was.
But of course, it's too late. The arc explodes, and now they're really screwed because they're stuck on the planet, and I imagine they don't have much longer until they're blown up by this crazy moon exploding thing.
Yep.
Moon crashing into the planet, or are they on the moon crashing into the planet? I don't know. I don't remember what it was, but
The
a moon
planet's
is
crashing
crashing
into the
into a
moon.
planet. Oh, okay. One or the other. Something's crashing into something, and they're on
Yep.
one of them.
Yep. Mobius is gonna show up on a jet ski and save the day.
Look, I would guarantee there's a jet ski by the end of the series,
Oh,
but
for sure.
where do we go from here, Joe? How do they get off of this planet? What's going on?
I think the TVA is gonna show up and maybe. Okay, here's my theory. Maybe they did enough to change the timeline that the Ark gets off of the moon, or maybe like they use their magic and they come up with the idea of we're gonna use our magic to save the Ark, which is gonna get the TVA here because these people have all become remnants, and then when the TVA shows up, they're gonna like do something to like get back. And that's my
I,
theory. As they're gonna purposefully do something, or something's gonna happen to cause the TVA to show up, and that's their ticket back.
my theory into the episode was that the final scene was going to be them getting rescued by yet another Loki, some kind of alternate Earth variant Loki. That's
Okay.
kind of what I mean. That's just a theory I have. I'm just pulling that out of my mind, but that's what I'm thinking. I like your TVA theory. I think that's definitely a direction they would go. I want them to get back to the TVA. I want more Owen Wilson. I think Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston together are what
Yep.
made the first two episodes so good. So I hope your theory is correct. I want to get some Owen Wilson. Maybe we get an alternate timeline Owen Wilson or
Yeah.
some variant version of Owen Wilson because we now know he is a variant. So maybe there's a couple other variants of him out there somewhere.
Wedding Crashers Owen Wilson shows up.
Yeah, maybe we'll get
Lightning
like a
McQueen
John.
shows up and they drive away.
Ka-chow. That would have been the best final scene. Could you have imagined the internet reaction? They're like, "Oh no, the arc is exploding!" And I turn around, and it's like he want to go fast, and he's just grinds his way right in there. Drifts onto the into the camera.
Ah, it would have been amazing.
That would have been a good moment. But I doubt that's what happens. We'll
Yeah.
see though.
Yeah.
I
We
think
shall see.
they gotta get rescued at this point. I kind of wish the episode was like 10 minutes longer, and they're like, okay, here's how they get rescued. Here's the
Yeah.
next cliffhanger. Like, here's either Owen Wilson showing up, and you're like, oh shit, they got caught, or here's
Maybe it's a
alternate
Fast and
Loki showing up.
maybe it's a Fast and Furious crossover, and Dom and the crew show up and rescue them.
Yeah, they're trying to save it to like after the movie comes out, so they don't spoil it, because it's like the post credit scene of Fast
Yeah.
Nine is Loki.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. But yeah, my theory running with it is that an alternate Loki's gonna come save them, and they're gonna get on this path. Because I do imagine when Tom Hiddleston says we're gonna go down a crazy path, we're gonna get to, I would imagine, some crazy different Lokis and some different timelines, and by the end, an actual multiverse of the MCU. And as much as I would love Owen Wilson to come back, I don't want them to go back to the TVA because we just were back at the TVA last at the premiere of this episode, and we were like, oh, okay, I guess we're back at the TVA. So I'd like us to get somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think the TVA showing up makes the most logical sense. We've been introduced to them before. It won't feel too like Deus Ex Machina if the TVA
Hmm.
shows up to rescue them because all of the people on the train are now going to escape and they're now all variants. So
Yeah, I think you have a good point there. They did change the timeline quite a lot more than they planned on it, and I also was theorizing that maybe Owen Wilson, he knows that the that Sylvie is hiding out at apocalyptic
yeah,
events, so maybe he's just been traveling to a ton of apocalyptic events, and Owen Wilson's character or a couple of TV agents show up next week, and we'll find out he's been doing that for like 10 years TVA time, just going to every apocalyptic event from the start to the
yeah,
end, trying to find him, and he, because of time travel logic, he was able to show up to them at the right time because they have to, as established last week, they have to experience apocalyptic events from front to back. They can't like jump around in the middle for some reason.
yeah,
That was just the time travel logic they used.
yeah,
So that would be a fun way to get the TVA in there. Like Owen Wilson not only shows up and saves him, but he's been doing this for like a decade, trying to find Loki every day, every second at every apocalyptic event, and they finally found him.
yeah. That'd be cool too. I'm just like he spent so long looking for him.
like in Interstellar, they come back up to the plane and it's like, oh, the dude's like all gray haired and has a beard now. It's been 30 years or something.
Yeah.
That could be interesting. But I do think like the show took a big sci-fi turn this week and went in the direction I didn't expect. So I'm looking forward to what they can do next. I don't know what I expected this week, but it wasn't this.
Yeah.
So maybe they'll subvert them again and do something. Uh, I thought this was a good episode, but maybe more interesting, more crazy and wild next week.
Yeah. For sure. You want my theory for how I think maybe this season could end? I don't know if they ever said this is like a series finale or like if this is a mini series or just like a season or what this is, but
Go for it.
so a young Sylvie is like listed in like the IMDb credits. Now IMDb isn't the most reliable when it comes to credits, and this isn't my theory. I saw this theory from someone else, and I like it. As we saw the little bit of Sylvie's kind of sad backstory, or at least her describing it, how she didn't have anyone to train her in magic and all this. So my theory is at some point, Sylvie is gonna like risk her life or do something and end up dying to help, Tom Hiddleston Loki. And I think Tom Hiddleston Loki, using his time pad, is going to go back in time and find a young Sylvie and essentially adopt her and raise her
I
and
like
like train
that.
her so she doesn't have like a sad backstory and has like someone to like watch out for her and teach her.
That'd be interesting. I really like that. I hope they lean into the time travel like that and just kind of zoom us around and do some cool stuff because that's what I was really hoping for out of this show.
Yeah.
Once they started getting into that multiverse premise and started getting into that idea of, oh, there really is all these different timelines and all these different variants. And
Yep.
it was cool to see this Doctor Who episode. I'm craving Doctor Who. It's been a while. The pandemic put
Yep.
that season on hold. I'm still waiting, but uh, I'm hoping next week we maybe even get to a. I'm disappointed though. I wish we got off of this planet by the end of the episode because I feel like we got to spend at least 5 minutes or or more getting off of the planet
Yeah.
next week, right? And
Yeah. I mean, it kind of depends. Do you want? I mean, the next episode could be 55 minutes, and the first 5 minutes are dedicated to them getting off this planet, or it could be 50 minutes and they were rescued at the end of this episode. So, especially like when in this Disney Plus streaming world, when they're not beholden to, a 44-minute or 22-minute time slot, then I'm not so much worried about like the allocation of time of whether it was in this episode or the next one.
that is true because by the end I'll just binge through it and it won't even phase me what's that one episode of what.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have a ton of big theories. I do. I think Kane the Conqueror certainly is where they're going to be going. And I think the TVA is obviously set up and to be the bad guys. And whether it was, I almost felt like it was revealed this week when they were like, "Oh, they're actually all variants," and it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, because the timekeepers, whoever they are keeping these people as like slaves essentially and wiping their minds and keeping them these corporate drones." So I do think the TVA is going to be the big bad of the show. And Owen Wilson, I pray to God, please Mobius turn to the good, to the Lokis, and because
I mean,
I want him to stick around.
something tells me he would, because he's always been like a little bit of a rebel. He's never been like a by the book. The TVA is amazing. Everything they do is incredible. It's always been like he does his own kind of thing. Like he works for them, sure, but he's not exactly like in love with them. So
Hmm. And I do think that kind of confirms, or not confirms, but it adds a lot of fuel to my theory from last week. The Because we got learned this week that the TVA are all variants, and I theorized last week that there was some kind of multiple Mobiuses going on, or like a Mobius loop,
uh,
or something where we were getting like a Mobius comes into the office and he has multiple marks on the table, he has multiple souvenirs, and then eventually he gets erased and comes back again. And the fact that he's a variant for me adds a little bit of fire to that feel because I gotta live some fan theories. Joe. A lot of mine died in the next show we're gonna talk about, so
so
I gotta have some theories here.
one of the things I will, it's not really a theory, but it's probably never gonna be like confirmed or brought up. But someone said in the opening episode where you go to the where you're first taken to the TVA and they ask you to take a number even though there's no one really in line in front of you. Someone suggested maybe that's like a quick test to see if you can follow direction and follow order. And if you take a number, maybe you become a member of the TVA, and if you refuse to take a number, they just destroy you. and erase
That's
you.
it's a good test. Like maybe there's all these little moments along Loki's path. They're like these small little tests that you got to pass through to get to acceptance by TVA, and that's why we're seeing
Yeah.
these little small tests. Like, oh, do the research, do the homework, find this thing, because it's like, oh, can Loki follow all or can he not? And
Yep. Yep. All right. So you ready for our next show?
yeah, I think we
Yeah.
covered Loki more than enough.
Yeah.
Looking forward to next week, but excited to talk about the Bad Batch. Star Wars is the Bad Batch. I'm gonna refresh my StreamYard for a second before we come back, but
All right.
I'll be there in 1 second.
All right. Yeah. So the next episode, or well, this episode of the Bad Batch is called Bounty Lost because, well, the Bad Batch lost, something precious to them to a bounty hunter, and that's probably why the episode is called Bounty Lost. And then in this episode, that bounty hunter lost their bounty. So,
Yeah, bounty lost, and I think you can tell multiple bounty hunters in one episode. You've gotten even a name drop of the big bounty hunter of them all.
Din
So
Djarin,
Joe, yeah, that was it. Give me your thoughts, Joe. What'd you think of the Bad Batch, the mid-season premiere of the Bad Batch?
I thought it was good. A good kind of info, like a very subtle info dump about what maybe the future of this show could be in future seasons of definitely tying into the sequel trilogy a little bit. We might have seen, somewhat of a familiar face. It was a little clouded and in a lot of green, so it was hard to tell. But there's different theories going around, and on Monday when they always drop the like little behind the scenes pictures and like the little information tidbits, then we might know more. But until then,
What a moment that was, Joe. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But
yeah,
yeah, I my jaw was a little bit on the
I
floor
thought
for that.
yeah, I definitely thought this was like a fun episode. I think the show's definitely picking up, for sure. I mean, it's hard to tell when the previous episode was essentially the mid-season finale and this was the mid-season premiere, but it's definitely like the show doesn't feel like it's dragging for me. I don't know about you, but there's some times with the animated shows, especially when they're normally 22 episodes long, where I'm like, okay, let's move it along. But this show is really moving along quickly.
Yeah, I'm really impressed by the show. I think the pacing's been really great. They don't have a lot of filler episodes. As much as I think filler episodes can be fun, I think the show is benefiting from being plot forward at a lot of points. And this episode, even more than last week, I think moved the plot forward. And where last week was really great action, I think this provided some really good action and cool action. It also provided a bit of the lore development and the stuff that. So I think you have a bit for everybody. You had the action fans satisfied. You had the kids had a nice cool arc with the kid character, so they're satisfied. They had a fun little cute droid. And you also had the lore hounds who are watching to get any little piece of anything out of this show. And I think it gave all of us a little bit to chew on. So I was really satisfied with the episode. I think it sets up a lot of good questions going forward, a lot of good possible directions that can go, and a lot of characters that we might see show up. And I'm
Yeah.
curious to get into that as we go.
Yeah, we also got a returning character that if you had to say what characters from the movies would you like to see in other media, the character would not have been on my top 100. Not because I'm against the character, just not a character I was dying to see. So, uh, but
Yeah,
anyway,
gonna
so where the previous episode ended, uh, Omega has been taken by legendary bounty hunter Cad Bane, and the Bad Batch of clones, had to go get her back, and that's kind of where we were.
yeah, we start off a nice chase scene here. The badge is being chased by Crosshair, and they're getting shot at. They decide, oh, I guess we gotta jump without Omega, so they jump out and leave. And meanwhile, Omega wakes up in the ship of Cad Bane. She's being held hostage. I can't remember. I think it was Toto, the name of
Toto,
his
yeah.
droid. And that droid, I think, was in Clone Wars as well. He was kind of Cad Bane's
Yep.
sidekick droid throughout the Clone Wars. So not only is Cad Bane back, but his nice little droid is back. And Omega is captured. Meanwhile, the Bad Batch is trying to get her. What do you think of the premise, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, pretty basic standard premise. It's cat and mouse type thing. Pretty standard basic, and that's kind of what Star Wars does. Is they take classic standard, stories that have been told for generations and generations and wrap them in the skin of Star Wars. So
And this feels almost like a Clone Wars moment where it's like, oh, we're thrown into the middle of the action. It's like, oh, what's going on? It's like, okay, she got kidnapped. We gotta rescue her.
I
And
could almost hear like Tom Kane's voice, like Cad Bane has kidnapped Omega. The Bad Batch, en route to rescue her. Blah blah blah.
that's what I was thinking. It's like if you just in a world where this is airing on Disney Channel or Disney XD or Cartoon Network or wherever it would have been in that alternate universe, like I could see someone tuning in and be like, "Oh, I heard this Bad Batch show is good. I'll watch the mid-season premiere," and then they got as much as they needed to get. Like, oh, this is the kid they're working with.
Yeah.
It's another clone, and they got to rescue her. And here's these
Yep.
clone guys, and here's Cad Bane. I remember Cad Bane, and it feels like a nice mid-season premiere. You could theoretically jump in if you needed to.
Yeah, for sure, definitely.
And I'll say the Camino thing for. Well, I don't know. I didn't take many notes on here, Joe, because like I mentioned, I was really impressed by the episode. So there's gonna be big gaps.
Yeah,
I
that's
won't
fine.
lie to you.
I've seen the episode twice, so I can probably try to fill them in as best as I can.
So after I mentioned Omega has been kidnapped by Cad Bane, and and we get a Bad Batch kind of exposition scene a bit where they explain that they're like, oh, why is Omega so important? Why are they after Omega of everybody in all these clones? And Tech has the answer, of course.
Yep.
He always seems to, and he explains to them that Omega is the only pure Jango Fett clone out there, outside, of course, of that guy Boba Fett that we heard about
Yeah. Well, they said.
in the Clone Wars.
Yeah, they said there's two. One previously codenamed Alpha, who now goes by Boba, and then Omega. So that kind of explains how Omega got her name. And it also explains why they're not really after Boba, is because Tech basically says that he's gone missing, or his whereabouts are unknown. So
Yeah, I like that. There are so many theories bouncing around in the first half of the season of, oh, what makes Omega so different? Is she a Palpatine clone? Is she force sensitive? Is she this or that? And mid-season premiere, we got what I assume is going to be at least most of the answer is that she's the pure Jango Fett DNA. She's what the Caminos need to make clones, and that's why they're after her, because they can't go after Boba Fett. Boba Fett's a lot easier, a lot harder to find than this kid they at one point had in their capture, and I
yeah,
do wonder if the Boba Fett name drop is gonna be a reminder that he's out there in the galaxy. Maybe he'll show up and help out his sister here, but that's for later on, I guess.
yeah. So one of the things I thought was interesting, and this I've seen other people speculate this, and I've seen it as well, is Boba Fett was created because Jango wanted a son. That's why he's unaltered.
Mm-hmm.
He has no changes to his DNA like the other clones do. And part of me wonders if, because Nala Se is like the chief medical scientist on Camino. So part of me wonders if the reason that they want Omega so much is maybe not because of her genetic material, maybe not because of any practical like scientific reason, but I part of me is wondering if Nala Se didn't create Omega because she wanted a daughter.
Interesting, yeah, because we do get in the episode that she has this emotional attachment to Omega, that
Yeah, I
she's
mean,
invested in her more than the Prime Minister thinks she should be.
yeah, I mean, there's that brought up of basically the prime minister says you're too connected to her, you're too attached to her, and it's, I mean, jumping ahead a little bit, we haven't talked about Fennec Shand, but it's kind of revealed she's the one that hired Fennec Shand, but she wasn't exactly hired to like kill her. It was basically hired to rescue her. And I think, and that's kind of my prevailing theory, is it'll maybe never be a thing that's expressly stated, but I think that's kind of why Omega was created. Now, exactly how they created a female clone with male DNA, I don't really know the whole science behind that, but
Look, it's Star Wars. I don't question
yeah.
the science.
Yeah, I think
If I
part of
start
it is
questioning
just
the
like the
science
Bad
of Star
Batch is
Wars,
like all dudes, and I think creating another pure male genetic clone is just like, okay, what makes him different than Boba? Does this make Boba less special? It's like, okay, we're just gonna make her female. She's a female clone of Django, which explains why she has the blonde hair, because I think Tamara Morrison's mother and sister in real life both have blonde hair, so I think that's the inspiration for why um, Omega has blonde hair.
It's a good observation. I like that a lot. I like that we're getting more answers on Omega. I think, like you mentioned, the pacing has been really good in this series so far. I think other shows would have held that off for like 4 seasons. Like we're not going to find out who Omega really is till the end of the show or halfway through the show or something, or even at least the end of the first
Yeah.
season. And I think the fact that we're getting at least some answers and direction for what
Yeah.
the answers for the show are going to be, I think is a good sign.
Yeah, and I see people online still like fully on board and thinking that Omega is force sensitive, but for me, I think if she was force sensitive, we would have gotten at least some hint about that, to a degree. And so far,
Hmm.
I mean, there's like a little bit where she's like intuitive and whatnot, but I'm completely ice cold on that theory that she is force sensitive. For me, the whole reason I thought she was force sensitive is I thought when the Bad Batch's ships activated, it would make it like it would be to turn against her, and that would make it so like that much heartbreaking. But the fact that all of their chips are deactivated minus Crosshair, like that's just gone. Like to me, that's when you like, what's the point of her being force sensitive anymore if they don't have their chips?
Yeah, because we'll get to it later, but I think she can be significant to the Palpatine Snow cloning kind of arc without actually being force sensitive. And I think
Yeah,
a lot of the theories initially were around that, like, oh, is she going to be carrying Palpatine's DNA? Is she going to be carrying this or that? That will lead us down the chain of events that got us to the sequel trilogy. And she might not actually be force sensitive, but I think you can satisfy both parties, I guess, where you give her that
yeah,
significance to Palpatine's arc while also not actually making her force sensitive, another like Grogu kind of character.
yeah. And I think that's also too repetitive to the Mandalorian if she's force sensitive. That automatically changes the dynamic where I think she's going to be more used for her brain, especially working. I think we're going to, over time, get more and more into the cloning aspect and the fact that she was working directly under basically the head cloning scientist her
Mm-hmm.
entire life. And especially now that we know she doesn't have the advanced aging, so she's been working under the advanced cloning, person for several years, not just like a year or two. So,
Yeah, and we get a mention in the next scene here on Camino, where we get a bit of a better idea of what their plan is, where Cad Bane's going to drop off Omega at what we now know is an abandoned cloning facility, an abandoned Camino cloning facility, which I think is an interesting little bit of a wrinkle. Like it could have been anywhere, and we're getting established the fact that the Kaminoans have this secret abandoned cloning facility out there somewhere, and maybe that's part of their deeper plan. Maybe they have this hidden cloning facility where if worse comes to worse, they can go back and open up this abandoned facility and get their Omega and build their clones up from the bottom again.
yeah, I think they're planning to make more soldiers, but not for the Empire, not for the Republic. I think they want to make more soldiers for themselves to fight against the Empire. Because I think we're slow. Like I thought originally that was the season finale, but I think that's more and more I'm on board with. That's the series finale. I think like the Prime Minister is kind of being shown to be an antagonist. We saw Ton Wei, who was the character I was referencing earlier. Of like that's the character I would not have guessed they ever brought back. Who is the Kaminoan that mainly talks to Obi-Wan Kenobi in Attack of the Clones. But apparently, she needed to come back to have the one line of "Yes, Prime Minister" and then die. So, uh,
Look, I'm all about that connective tissue.
yeah.
More Attack of the Clones validation is good on me. Any connection you can give me to the
Yeah.
best Star Wars movie, I'm down for.
And then Nalase, who is the basically Omega's mother, that Kaminoan is the one that like I was reading up on her, and in canon, she's had like a special affinity for the clone. She's not like this heartless, careless. She cares about the clones as individuals, and so I think there I could easily see the Prime Minister dying, Nalase being kind of the new head of Camino, and she's the one that to defend the clones leads the attack on the Empire, and probably a futile effort that doesn't really go anywhere, and
I
probably is
imagine so.
why Camino and their cloning facility gets taken over, and that's why we see the new head of it, Dr. Pershing, who is a human and not a Kaminoan by the time of the Mandalorian.
Yeah, I think it's good to note that like by the time they get to Mandalorian, we'll talk about the cloning stuff later, but keep in mind, Mandalorian is a long time after the show, and the Empire still hasn't
It's
mastered cloning.
just trying to do the math. 19. Okay, so A New Hope is 19 years after Revenge of the Sith, plus 4 for the time of the original trilogy, so that's 23 years, plus 5 because Mandalorian is 5 years after Return of the Jedi. So, yeah, so Mandalorian is 28 years after what we're saying. 27, 28 years after the Bad Batch.
Yeah, so even 30 years later, we know that the Empire is struggling to master cloning, and they haven't really figured out how to get it there. And I'm imagining that's because they don't have this pure Jango fed DNA, this DNA we know can work well with cloning. So I I have hope, Joe. I'm optimistic that Omega is not going to be killed or captured by the end of Bad Batch
I
because
have. Can I? I know we like to save theories for the end, but I have another theory about the surviving members of the Bad Batch.
should
Based.
you we can get to that, but I wanna before we get to any cloning and stuff like that, I wanna cover that later
Okay.
scene. So,
Okay. I'll save that for the end then. My, based on interviews and stuff, who I think the surviving.
but yeah, let's save that for the end. I want to get
Okay.
through a couple more lines here, because after this is when I started getting lost in the action and not taking many notes. So we'll get through what I got. But Omega decides to outsmart this robot, the Cad Bane's sidekick droid. She tricks him, talks him into letting her fix his legs, and she does it. But then, of course, she disables him and says, "Oh, sorry, just temporary," and gets out of her cell. Meanwhile, of course, the Bad Batch is closing in on her, trying to track her down, but they can't really find her. And she's setting out to find her communicator. All kind of goes well, but we see that Cad Bane is stalking her down. What'd you think of this kind of action scene with Omega where she's running through? Kind of cool visuals, I thought. I
Yeah, I
really
really liked it.
this
Yeah,
show's delivering on visuals, I think.
yeah, of her going through all like the shelves and everything, looking for her communicator, and then eventually she does get it, but it's all staticky and muffled, and she realizes it's not enough.
Yeah, we get these cool exterior shots of her going through these like locations on the outskirts of the planet, and I think this show, I would just kind of, I'm blown away sometimes by the exteriors on the show when you compare them to the Clone Wars, and just
Yeah.
like the quality and animation has grown so much.
Yeah, like season 1 of the Clone Wars, it's like a PS2 cutscene, and some of this stuff, like you take the, you know, beings out of it, and it looks almost real.
And of course, like you mentioned, we're gonna get an appearance from yet another character here, but it's one we've already established. Because Cad Bane is closing in on Omega, it seems like she's gonna get captured. But of course, our favorite badass Mandalorian who is there, or badass from the Mandalorian, who made her a Clone Wars debut a couple episodes ago. What is her name, Joe?
Fennec Shand.
Fennec Shan. She has returned to rescue Omega from the clutches of Cad Bane, and they get into yet another cool Cad Bane duel. And I really thought this one was cool.
Yeah, it's kind of showing to me that Cad Bane is kind of, towards the tail end of his career. And if you notice, there was a moment in the scene where his hat fell off and he had kind of metal plate in his head, which he did not have during the Clone Wars, which definitely ties into one of the unfinished arcs from the Clone Wars where he had a battle and showdown with Boba Fett. And in the unfinished arc, I think you can watch it on like the Star Wars channel on YouTube. He gets shot in the head, and he shoots Boba Fett in the head, which gives Boba Fett his iconic dent in his helmet. And so we know he's already had his showdown with Boba Fett, which I know we save our theories to the end. I'm going to get to that. I'll just drop one real quick. I think we're going to see that showdown in flashback in the Book of Boba Fett. Because while Robert Rodriguez is not the most talented director, I can't think of anyone better that I would love to see direct that live action showdown of a young Boba Fett and Cad Bane.
I think he delivered on the action in his Mandalorian episode, so I think he would be a good fit for that. And I do think it's fascinating because Star Wars, even more than the MCU, I think ties everything very much tight knit together. And we see all these characters that cross over, but not just for fun. Like we're seeing the plot connects, like things that were brought up in previous shows are going to be important here, and we're going to get the Cad Bane duel that was going to be in Clone Wars. We'll get it mentioned in here, and then maybe it shows up in Mandalorian, and we'll get a character who was in Mandalorian who will be in here that'll then show up in Book of Boba Fett. And I really enjoy that level of crossover in Star Wars sometimes when
Yeah.
it fits the story, when it actually like fits the moment. And I think it makes sense to have these bounty hunters battling over the
Yeah.
big bounty of Omega.
Yeah, to me it makes sense of why characters like Fennec Shand and Cad Bane show up all over because it's like, okay, Cad Bane was established as the best bounty hunter in the
Mm-hmm.
galaxy. So if you have a lot of money and you have a target you really need to acquire, you're going to of course hire the biggest bounty hunter, the best bounty hunter in the galaxy.
Yeah, these are the kind of characters I like your B and your C and your even your D type characters like that one Camino and we know from the Clone War or
Yeah,
Attack of the Clones.
Conway, yeah.
Because it's not like they're going to the planet and it's like, oh, there's Luke Skywalker, and he's like, hey guys, I'm Luke. I'm
Yeah.
going to Tashi Station.
Yeah, it's not like Owen Lars is in this episode. Like, he's like, "Oh, like I'm just on vacation with my nephew and my wife." It's like, no, it's characters that make sense. I'm still waiting for my Hondo appearance because I'll be sad if Hondo's not in this show.
Well, I'll bring it to my next line on my notes here, Joe, where I just say, wow. I'm not sure what I was referring to, but I was impressed by
I will
something
say
here.
I was a tiny bit disappointed after the Boba Fett name drop when we saw someone come in to rescue Omega, and I thought for half a second it might be Boba Fett.
I imagine Boba Fett, like we got a name drop, we got like he's not only name
Yeah.
drop, but he's connected to the arc. Like I would be shocked if we don't get Boba Fett by the end of the season.
I think Boba Fett's gonna be like the season cliffhanger, like the like something something something. The Kaminoans try to get Omega's DNA, but it doesn't work out. She breaks away and goes off with a Bad Batch again. And then they're like, oh, well, there is another person that has the DNA we need. And they cut to, and, word on the street, he's working as a bounty hunter now. And then, cut to, we see Boba Fett off in the desert, maybe walking up to Jabba's palace or something.
I like that. I think that's a good direction. I definitely think Boba Fett makes an appearance by the end of the season. They've been
Yeah,
name dropping him too much. He's too connected to the plot. And
yeah.
we were talking about Maul and is Maul this, is Maul that, and I think
Yeah,
Boba
I don't
Fett's the
think
one that's going to be there.
Yeah, I think I don't see Maul fitting this show right now. I could see Maul being like maybe they move up in the world, and right now they're working for Sid, who's basically like this lowly bar owner essentially. And maybe if we get to like a season 3 or season 4, they're directly working for Crimson Dawn and doing jobs for Crimson Dawn.
I would like that because I don't imagine Maul's going to show up like lightsabers in hand, dueling people,
Yeah,
but I think it's going to be more of a Crimson Dawn connection. We're going to
yeah,
see they do work, and Maul's kind of like this background criminal,
yeah.
and leading
Yeah,
them,
if
and
you're gonna
maybe
work
by
for an
like the finale.
organization, you work for Crimson Dawn.
Yep. Or maybe like the rebels. I have a rebel tattoo. You can't see it much, but
Crimson
it's
Dawn is
there.
better. That's the organization you want to work for.
We got this scene here, the scene of the episode, I think. Yeah, another scene of the episode where Omega's confronted by the bounty hunter and she says, well, why do Kaminoans want me? And we get this ominous line of, you already know why, or something like that. And she backs up and this very Snoke looking thing falls down. Snoke, is it Kaminoan? What
There's
is
okay,
that thing? But we know it's a failed clone and it freaks Omega out and she runs.
so I know we save. I've brought it up a number of times. We save our theories for the end, but my thing is, so the first clone she sees, we see the face very clearly. It's like the same species as Nub from the original uh, Star Wars trilogy. The second face I think she sees that's very obscured to me I think is like a pre-Snoke clone. I don't think it's like the Snoke we know, but I think it's that type of thing. The third one I feel is Kaminoan.
Yeah, because I was trying to pause it as I went and say, like,
I
okay,
paused
that's not Snoke.
I paused the face on the second one that was more obscured that you couldn't really see. And to me, that one, the face shape and outline just perfectly matched Snoke. So I think that one was like a Snoke type thing. But I still think it all ties into that whole realm of Snoke and clones and Palpatine and all that.
Yeah, I love this background arc that they're building up slowly but surely of this cloning plan, and it's just fascinating potential. Like you have the the Mandalorian connection, and you also have this, and you have the fans who can sit there and do the puzzle pieces and figure out like, okay, well, if they had the cloning at this point and the other point, and eventually, I'm sure they'll get to the point where they're answering the questions of the last of Rise of Skywalker, and we get that through line of you can watch it from start to finish, and you get that arc that wasn't there in the first place.
Yeah.
Very much like Clone Wars was, where you have the prequels, and it's like, okay, there were a couple of flaws in the prequels. Let's go back and like fill in those holes. And I'm really
Yeah.
fascinated. I hope they can pull that off.
Yeah, the sequel trilogy I don't think is ever going to be perfect, but I think a lot of the backstory problems I think you can fill in and make better. Like I think there's something things you can do with Palpatine and Snoke to make those things better.
I agree, and I really think these shows are where you do it
Yeah.
because, like in reality, I think most of the common audience was like, "Oh yeah, that last one, like it was fine. It wasn't as good as the other ones. It was
Yeah.
disappointing, whatever." But they don't care about like the details of who is Snoke and
Yeah.
who is a clone. And the
Yeah.
Star Wars fans are the ones who do, and we're the ones who are watching. And
Yeah.
these essentially this kid show on Disney Plus that we're really invested in, and we're also watching Mandalorian. We're going to be watching anything else, and it can serve both audiences. And I don't think most common audiences you go back and they're gonna watch Rogue Squadron or whatever it is that comes out from Patty Jenkins. They're not gonna care. Oh, who is Palpatine's clone? They're
Yeah.
just there for the next Star Wars.
Yeah, and not to get on too much of a tangent, but I think things like Luke's appearance in The Mandalorian, and I still would like a show that's basically Luke's Jedi Academy that starts the season series premiere is I would picture it as like an animated show, and the series premiere is Han and Leia dropping Ben off with Luke, and the series finale is Ben's turn to the dark side. And I think seeing prime Luke, prime older Luke, as like this perfect Jedi that people always imagined, it will make the like down on his luck, tired, basically Yoda Luke in The Last Jedi work better, because I think that's just a lot of people's problem is we never saw prime Luke, so like that version of Luke doesn't have anything to balance against.
Yeah, and I understand people. I don't want to get on a tangent about other shows, but
Yeah.
I like connective tissue when it actually fits the plot. So
Yeah.
I'm curious. They're building this overarching plot of the clones and what does it mean, and I just wonder how much that'll tie into future shows. I can't theorize on that now, but
I
it'll
think
be
it,
interesting to see how they can grow that.
I think it'll be hard for it not to tie into Book of Boba Fett. Like, there's a possibility. I mean, it'd be hard because it cut out a lot of stakes of Book of Boba Fett, but of us seeing an older Omega in Book of Boba Fett.
I mean, that would be a move. Who
Yeah.
knows? I'm
I
fascinated
mean,
though.
it
I
also
think
depends. If Book of Boba Fett lasts 3 or 4 seasons, then when Bad Batch ends, we could see a scenario like if Bad Batch ends a year before Book of Boba Fett ends, there could be a scenario where um, an older Omega works with Boba Fett, or maybe like there's talk of like the Rangers of the New Republic is essentially like the Avengers of the Star Wars shows, where that's where like they all work together and team up to maybe fight Thrawn or something, and like an older Omega could show up in that if the Bad Batch is done by then.
yeah, Omega has the potential to be like a Ahsoka level character where she starts off as this like childish kind of unexperienced character and grows in confidence and grows in experience and becomes something really great. And
Yeah.
I would love for that to happen. I'd love to watch that organically happen over the course of a series like that.
And she's also not starting off with a giant amount of hate that Ahsoka did. Like, I
People
mean,
pretty much liked her as soon as we
yeah,
started
yeah, and probably we
Omega.
have Ahsoka to thank for that. I think if I mean, this show wouldn't exist if Clone Wars didn't exist. But if like Ahsoka wasn't in Clone Wars and Ahsoka just didn't exist in as a character, but the show was still loved the same, and then you had Bad Batch come out with Omega, I'm sure there'd probably still be a certain level of hate for Omega because people suck.
hmm But Omega does get rescued here. She's rescued by the Bad Batch just in time. She finds her transponder, is able to send off a message, and she gets saved just in time. She turns Fennec Shan down yet again. He says, Omega, I'm trying to help you. And she says, that's what you said last time, and leaves. And then she gets rescued by the Bad Batch. I was kind of surprised that they rescued her so quickly. I thought this might be like a multiple episode kind of
Yeah,
arc, but
same.
it seemed to be leading away from arcs like that in the series.
Yeah, I could have seen a scenario where maybe Fennec Shand rescues Omega, and then the Bad Batch basically thinks they have to rescue uh, Omega from Fennec Shand, and then there's kind of a thing where they realize Fennec Shand saved Omega, and maybe there's more of a team up there, like kind of a like, hey, let's work together in the future type thing.
Mm-hmm. There's a cool scene too where Omega fights against Toto, Restore with his flying foot, or what you want to call it, a little jetpack thing that she fixed for him, and
Yep.
I think that's fun. I love call me a child if you want, Joe, but I really have a soft spot for these like goofy droid characters. They once in a while bring into the Clone Wars and Rebels
Yep.
and now Bad Batch.
Yeah. I wish this show had more of like a droid character. I know there's Gonki or whatever, but he's barely in this show. I want this show to have a droid.
Yeah,
And
give me a
Echo
chopper.
doesn't count.
Close, close, but not yet. Maybe when all the Bad Batch start dying, but
Yeah.
I think we got to the theories at this point. If you covered the episode and you mentioned Bad Batch survivors, so I want to start with you, Joe. What's your theory on who makes it out?
So there was an interview with one of like the main writers on the show, and she was essentially talking about how like Echo and Omega's relationship and how like Echo's importance to the fandom and stuff. So my theory is I think by series end the only two people still alive, and we've seen from um, like Rebels and stuff, they're not afraid to kill big characters like Kanan. I think Echo and Omega are the last two survivors, the two that weren't official Bad Batchers, the two that didn't start out as Bad Batchers. I think over time they all kind of perish, and Echo and Omega are the last two standing. And maybe
I like
Echo
that.
goes off to like raise Omega.
Hard to say I like that, but I think it's a good plot development, and I could see like a Kanan level sacrifice of Hunter. Like he has his final moment where he has to give himself up to defend the team,
Yep.
and even get like a nice heart to heart eye contact moment of
Yep.
Omega looking into the eyes. I could see him, maybe not using the Force, but he could be fighting off some stormtroopers.
And I think one of the Bad Batch will die this season, like the season finale, and that includes Crosshair. Like, if Crosshair dies, I say that counts. But I think one of the original Bad Batchers die this season. Watch Echo be the first to die, and I'm like, well, that theory's shit.
Yeah, Omega doesn't make it out of the season, Joe.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
yeah. But
that would be a twist.
I think one of the original Bad Batch members die this season, and I think that could be kind of a thing that happens moving forward. Because I think they're planning for this to be a 3 to 4 season thing. I could imagine, each season, maybe in the mid season or the season finale or penultimate episode, one of the Bad Batchers die.
My theory for which one dies is Tech. I think he serves
Nah,
a
Tech's on
double
a
role with Echo.
Tech's on a rise. I like there. See there. I thought they were kind of the same character because they were both kind of Tech characters, but they're already proving with their different personalities to be different characters. Where, and I saw this too of Tech is kind of like the neurotypical representation on this show of like
That is true.
for
I don't
people
want
with
it.
like autism or Asperger's or something like that. He's kind of, but he's also not like the butt of the joke. Cause I don't know if you listen to the Force Center podcast, but they were talking about how like Tech says Tech has like that he's kind of like that representation, and he says things that are funny, but he never says things that are wrong. He's never like the butt of the joke when he says something. It's always just like different than what you would expect. Like when Omega asked him what the war was like, and he's like, "Well, it was just a various skirmishes on different fronts, across the galaxy over a number of years." It's like, well, you're not wrong, but that's not also exactly what she was asking.
I like that. I think I didn't think about him as representation in that way, but I do appreciate that a lot. And I think the only reason I was thinking he could be the one that goes off is he has this element of like, oh, does he or doesn't he like care about the team as much as other people? Like he has
Yeah,
these secrets he doesn't tell, and like these, he's like, oh yeah, because of this and this, and I could see like his last moment being like, he really does care, he really is invested, and then he kind of has
yeah,
to die. But that would
yeah.
be tragic. Unfortunately
I,
tragedy might come with the territory of killing off the Bad Batch.
yeah, I just think for the first death you want it to be emotional, so I could see it be a crosshair who turns to the light, but in doing so sacrifices himself and dies. and you get the emotion that way. If he finally overcomes his chip, realizes the wrong he's done, and tries to atone for that, and in that he dies. And then obviously you have Wrecker and Hunter sacrificing themselves for Omega would obviously be,
Mm-hmm.
big emotional deaths. We're currently, as we stand right now, Tech and Echo dying is like, it sucks, but it's not. If Tech were to die in like the next episode, I don't see it being like that sad. It's just like, oh, it sucks for him. Moving on.
Yeah, I can only see it if they really do start building up Tech over the season and really making him like a prominent role, and he starts coming out of his shell and that kind of stuff, and then you get like that tragic turn of, oh, he really became like a full
Yep.
actualized member of the team, and then he
Yeah.
has to fall.
Yeah.
But Crosshair, I think, is the more
That's my
realistic.
number one bet
But
of who dies, is Crosshair.
because I imagine he's not a series long villain. He's good for the first season, but I
No.
don't see him lasting much longer than that. Especially if they bring in Boba Fett and they bring in
Yeah.
these larger scale antagonists like the Crimson Dawn eventually. That I think Crosshair feels like small potatoes compared to those characters.
Yeah, I could see Crosshair. I could easily. I haven't thought about it until you brought it up, but I could easily see Boba Fett being the villain of next season.
Mm-hmm. And
He's
he's constantly on the hair of them, and he's constantly closing in, and they have these conflicts once in a while.
another question. How long before we see Darth Vader, or see like the villain of the final season,
I don't know. I wonder if we don't see Darth Vader until like the last season, or unless they,
or do they do
because who
what Rebels
knows?
does, where he's like could be in the season premiere of season 2, but he's the one that like dispatches someone else. Like if Boba Fett is the villain of season 2, maybe we see like the first time Darth Vader ever hires Boba Fett is to like fight the Bad Batch because they're becoming a problem for the Empire.
I think we're more likely to see the Emperor himself than we are to see Darth Vader. I think
Okay.
seeing him as the one giving commands out to someone to find Omega could be what the plan. Because I
Yeah.
think we get this idea that Palpatine has this secret plan even above the head of Darth Vader. Like I don't know how canon the comics are or not, but we know that
Yeah.
Palpatine's cloning ideas and his Snoke plan is something that he keeps above the head of Vader, and Vader
Yep.
only has like the faintest idea of what his ideas are. And I would like to see he has this secret bounty hunter that he's hunting down Omega to try and get that cloning DNA for himself. And Darth Vader doesn't even know about it. And I'm sure like Darth Vader, I think has to make it a Star Wars. It's the right era for it. And but I could see him like way towards the end of the show, like maybe the last season before that, like maybe the penultimate season finale. We
Yeah.
get hum per and we see Vader walk on, but I'd like to save him for the end.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's
Uh,
weird to say that the Emperor is somehow lower stakes than Darth Vader, but I somehow feel like Darth Vader's become like even more iconic than the Emperor has in some ways. Where like as soon as he's on the screen, you're like, oh wow, he's here.
yeah. Yeah, because I think when we're saying the Emperor, we're seeing him more appearing as a political figure, not a lightsaber wielding Sith Lord that's like, oh, we're in imminent danger. Where Darth Vader shows up, it's like, oh, we're all about to die right
Yeah,
now.
we're dead. Because
Yeah,
my imagination is like, oh, like a hologram of the Emperor is giving
yeah.
some command to someone,
Yeah, exactly. Where
and
it's like not imminent life threatening. Where Vader shows up, it's like, oh yeah, so we're dead. That's cool.
you could see Vader show up at the end and kill Hunter, one of the Bad Batch,
Yeah,
and you're like, oh wow, he's coming in for
yeah,
Omega for some
yeah.
reason or other.
Yeah, I can see that. And Echo, maybe Echo because he knows that Anakin is what spares him.
Yeah, I'm really curious. I want to get more of a picture of the galaxy at this point.
Also, I could see
'Cause-
Commander Coat. Like I could see next season you have Boba Fett as like the crime world underworld antagonist. How Crosshair or how Cad Bane is, and then how Crosshair's kind of the Empire villain. I could see a situation where like Commander Cody is the Empire villain, and Boba Fett is like the criminal underworld villain.
Yeah, and you can get Commander Cody similar arc to Crosshair, where he starts to like see the error of his ways and realize that
Yeah,
maybe he's doing the wrong
yeah,
thing and comes to his self actualization in that way.
yeah. I still think Commander Cody could be a villain in Obi-Wan though, so who knows?
Who knows? Hey, maybe both. They're
Yeah,
clearly tying these shows together pretty directly.
yeah,
But yeah, the only thing I'm hoping for the rest of the season here is Like, sure, we're probably gonna get some characters that show up. We're gonna get some cloning answers by the end of the season, but I want to get a good picture of the galaxy and how it's adapting to the Empire's rule. I thought that was the more interesting part of the premiere. We were seeing like this small village that's suddenly taken over by the Empire, and they're like, "Oh, we got to get these passports? What's going on?" And
Yep.
uh, I think I want to see some more of that. And the Bad Batch has been kind of separated. They've been living in the underworld that is more or less unchanged under the Empire, as we've seen throughout Star Wars. Like the underworld is just like, oh, Empire, Rebellion, Republic, who cares? It's all the same thing. And eventually that gets boring. Like I want to know what it was like on what this was actually like and what it was like for the average person. And we get some of that in Rebels by the end of towards the end of the Empire, like what Ezra's life was like. But I would like to see what it was like in the rising of the Empire here.
Yeah.
So, you got any final thoughts on Bad Batch, Joe? We've come to the
Nope.
end of the plot here.
Nope. I was just trying to think if there's any other character I want to see that the timeline fits, and I'm like, the only one I could think of, it'd be kind of cool to see like a young Leia in like season 4, season 5. Be kind of
I
cool.
could see her in some kind of political role.
Well, she'd be
Like she
like,
would be very, very young, but she could be like in like a political scene, like behind her father or
yeah,
something
yeah,
like that. I'm
yeah. Okay,
saying.
yeah, that makes sense. I'd be like, I don't know how much political pull she has as a toddler, but
Yeah, she'd be very small, but that's what I was imagining. Like Bail Organa's giving some speech, and then little Leia walks in for a second or
yeah,
something.
yeah,
I'm curious though, because this show has been very action oriented. It's been very like focused in the Bad Batch, and occasionally gets to the Kaminoans, but it hasn't gotten
yeah,
to a lot of like the larger scale, galaxy wide kind of stuff. So I don't know how much we're gonna see of that.
yeah. Me either. Ready to talk our next thing? Yeah, or you got more to say on Bad Batch?
No, I'm ready. Bad Batch, we talked about it,
All right.
but I'm excited for Monsters Inc. We came up on an anniversary of it recently, so this is gonna be
Yeah.
our talk of Monsters Inc.
Yeah, we got Monsters Inc. And then we got the. Yeah, I watched the trailer for it. I didn't really know what to expect for Monsters at Work, but I watched the trailer for it yesterday, and it looks relatively interesting. Of them, it's basically about the changeover of being, based on scares to based on laughs. So they have to hire basically new people. So I thought that was kind of an interesting concept. But yeah, Monsters Inc. I think it came out in 2003.
I'm looking at 2001 on here, believe it or not.
Oh wow, that makes me feel old. Uh,
Yeah, long time ago. Directors were
uh,
Pete Docter, the classic Pixar go-to, but we also had David Silverman and Lee Unkrich. Like I said, it came out in 2001. One of the classic Pixar movies for me. We got Billy Crystal as Mike. We got John Goodman as Sully, and we have classic characters like Boo, the little kid. We have Randall, played by Steve Buscemi, the villain. He's kind of like a lizard, scary guy. And the premise of this movie is that it's a monster world where the monsters, to power their city, to power their reality, they have to scare kids in our reality. And the way that they get to that is by going through these closet doors that are kind of brought through in a factory. And they open up the closet door, and through essentially like a portal of space and time, they walk through into childhood bedrooms. And of course, Joe mentioned the twist of it is that the monsters are terrified of the kids, as terrified as the kids are of them,
yep.
but they have to get the scares out of the kids to power their city. I love this movie. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, Joe, but I think this is Pixar's best movie.
Okay, that's a hot take.
It's just super creative. I think they build such a really fascinating world through so many different complex layers of like, okay, there's this city, they have to power it by screams, they go through these doors, you're in this factory. And I think that's a lot for a kid to take in. And the fact that it's presented so consumably is really fascinating. I think it builds a fascinating world. We mentioned in our last week review of Luca that it felt kind of unambitious, uncreative, it didn't do anything new. And when I rewatch Monsters Inc., there's like 10 things new here. Like, sure, they take the general workplace kind of arc of like, oh, they're scared of this foreign scary thing, and they find out that it's actually not that scary, and they work together, and like that's an arc that's been done before in animation. But I think Pixar puts it in this fascinating new dynamic in this new world and these new characters, and it's one of my favorites. I think it's a great Pixar movie, one of the forgotten classics of Pixar. What are your thoughts on Monsters Inc., Joe?
So off the top of my head, I would put it around like sixth best. I would say the first three Toy Stories are better. I would say Incredibles is better, and I would say Finding Nemo is better. But that's just me. Um, but yeah, like I was thinking about that as we were first started talking about it, that we would say that the Luca didn't feel that original, and Monsters Inc. feels very original. I've never seen a movie like that before or since. And there's just so many small details of like they don't have light switches in the movie. They have like light valves because the laughs are gas, so they don't really have wires. Everything is run by gas, so it makes sense for you like to power your lights instead of a switch. You have a valve because it like releases the gas to power the light, which I thought, and just so many things like that in the movie. I'm just looking at their cast right now. I forgot Jennifer Tilly's in this movie. Obviously, John Ratzenberger as the Yeti. That's probably my favorite John Ratzenberger like cameo. Like I'm not gonna count Ham in the Toy Story movies because that's actually like a significant role. But John Ratzenberger as the Yeti is probably my favorite. Like John Ratzenberger Pixar cameo.
I love the way that this builds its world. I think it's just so interesting. Everything is so unique, and I love these characters too. Like Sully and Mike are such a great dynamic, and even all these years later, without like, there's been a prequel, but it's not one of Pixar's like big
Yeah,
hit franchises. I feel like it still feels very significant among the fandom of Disney and among the fandom of animation, comparatively to something like even Cars. Like Cars has had two sequels. There's three movies, some TV show spin-offs, all this kind of stuff, and nobody talks about Cars. Like it's
yeah,
not like, I guess it's relevant to kids, but I think Monsters Inc. has had some longevity with its characters. That's really impressive. I like
yeah,
it. I like the comedy. I think it's a really funny. A lot of good running gags, like Mike getting covered by stuff, and the TV commercial covered by the price tag in the magazine, and even with all that, he's still really excited about it. And you get like some kind of running jokes of like, put that thing back where it came from, or so help me.
yeah, yeah. It's iconic. Like if you're our age, like everyone knows that. Yeah, one of the things I really like is like it helped like behind the scenes wise is it helped like increase like the level of animation and hair. Like hair before this movie never looked realistic in 3D animation. It was always just like one stiff thing tied to someone's head, but then they wanted to
Hmm.
make Sully's hair look realistic, and basically since then in 3D animation they've been able to do more realistic hair, which I can't even imagine how they would animate that. That just seems like the biggest pain in the ass.
Yeah, and you compare it to stuff from today, like Raya and the Last Dragon had that really beautiful looking dragon with all that fur and a lot of detail, and all that I think comes from this movie. I think it really pioneered that kind of detail. And
Yeah.
you look back and watch it now, and like, of course, the animation's aged a bit, but it still looks great. I think
Yeah.
that the contrast and the color all looks really great.
Yeah, so many great running jokes that we even kept in our thumbnail of like Mike being excited to be on like the cover of the magazine and he was, covered up by the barcode, and so like the whole thing of that running joke I really liked as a kid.
Yeah, and I like the creativity of the layers to it too. Like, you could have just had, oh, it's a monster world where the monsters have to scare kids to get their power, but they added that extra layer. Like, okay, but what if also? And I think that's something that Pixar's always been good about. Like, okay, what if also? Like, be little sprinkle of interesting on top of the like, okay, toys talk, but what if also there's this new toy coming in, and
Yeah.
they gotta then like, because it could have just been a movie about monsters scaring kids, empowering their city, but the fact that they added this layer of the monsters are scared of the kids, and that's an extra level of twist on it that I think makes it fun. And
Yeah,
of course, you
definitely.
get the running Harvey Weinstein-esque villain throughout the movie.
Oh yeah, Mr. Water News.
One of Pixar's first twist villains, which is something they've become iconic for. Like in Toy Story 3, they had that big teddy bear that turned out to be a bad guy, and
Yeah.
and then Incredibles, they had a guy that turned out to be a bad Syndrome. In the beginning of the movie, he's like a nice fanboy, and then he becomes a bad guy. And this is one of the first times Pixar was able to pull off that twist villain.
Yeah. And like it looked believable. Like it should have been obvious. It's like this big spider, and you thought it was Roz, who I think was voiced by Brad Bird. Um, like it should have been obvious just because he looks like the villain, but like apparently kids are dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. All right, Joe. I had no clue this giant spider corporate monster was the bad guy.
And it was James Coburn, who's like kind of a legendary veteran actor.
When I watched it recently. I was surprised by just how Harvey Weinstein he is. Like,
Yeah.
he's like, we're going to go as far as we can to get this done, and I don't care who I hurt. I don't care what it costs you. And there's this element of him manipulating people. And when this movie got nominated for an Oscar, it was mentioned during
I was
the
just about to bring
ceremony.
that up. Nathan Lane brought it up.
It
He said
was
yeah, go for it.
you go for it. Quote it, Joe. You had it brought up.
Well, so Nathan Lane, who is presenting, said something along the lines of, then we have Monsters Inc., which is surprisingly not a documentary about the Weinsteins.
Yep. I think it points to this strange reality we live in where there was this Hollywood insider secret, and you wonder if this
Yeah.
movie was someone at Pixar was trying to yell about it, you know?
Yeah, that's why whenever people like Oprah, whoever, say, "Oh, I didn't know," like Oprah and Meryl Streep and all these people say they didn't know, it's like, okay, I like before that story broke, and like me at the time living in Michigan, no connection to Hollywood whatsoever, knew he did some shady shit. So don't pretend like you didn't know. Everybody knew.
Even the Monsters Inc. characters
Yeah,
knew, Joe.
yeah.
But I'm a big fan of this movie. I see that you're not as high on it as I am. I think it's an unpopular opinion to have it so high in my Pixar ranking, but I think it does a lot of Pixar stuff so well. It creates a new world. It brings us into fascinating characters that are unlike ourselves but relatable in similar ways. And it I also just love the ending. I think like the premise of these doors that lead into different places, and they're going through like these factory conveyor belts of doors. That chase scene towards the end was so thrilling when I was a kid. I was like, God, I wish I could just like go here and travel through these doors and see all these different places. I think it really drew me into the world that was so
Mm-hmm.
much unlike our own.
And then like, even though I'm not as high on that movie, like the scene where Sully has most of the door built, and then Mike gives him the last shard of the door at the end,
Hmm.
and then he goes to see Boo, but you don't really know like how long it's been. It's kind of implied that Boo's like relatively older. Just like it's an emotional moment when you're a kid.
Yeah, I felt that in my heart. He's been wanting to reunite with Boo for so long, and he
Yeah.
finally gets this last piece to reunite with her after assumedly years waiting and trying to build up the pieces and trying to figure it out and put it back together. And I love that we don't get like she doesn't run out and hug him or something.
Yeah.
you know,
You just see
like it's
his
a little bit
face.
ambiguous.
Yeah, you just see uh Sully's face and like that smile for him, and that's enough. That's all you need.
Yeah, like that is the slight little touch of happiness at the end. They're like, oh, she's happy to see him, or
Yep.
he's happy to see her at least. It's going well.
Yep.
I like this a lot. I'm looking forward to the series because the series is a sequel and we haven't gotten any follow up for this since it came out. We got a prequel movie, but that of course didn't take up the story afterwards. So this will be our first time
Yep.
in 20 years since we've seen a follow up to Monsters Inc.
Yeah, you got John Goodman coming back to play Dan Connor on what was a revival of Roseanne and then became the Connors. You got John Goodman coming back to play Sully in Monsters at Work on Disney Plus. So I can't wait to see him in like 5 or 10 years bring back the character of Walter Sobchak in The Big Lebowski 2, The Return of the Lebowski.
Please give me that. One of my favorite movies of all time. I any final thoughts on Monsters Inc., Joe? I wanted to just touch on it quickly,
No,
but one of my favorites.
I think that's kind of all I have to say on Monsters Inc. So
Yeah, that's all I had too. Great movie. I
mm,
encourage you guys all to rewatch it if you haven't seen it in a while. I think it might impress you. Uh, and shout out to Kingdom Hearts 3. At least you had a Monsters Inc. level.
yeah, and I will say if there's any show or movie or something you want us to check out on Disney Plus, I know John Stamos has a show about like girls high school basketball that I really don't have any interest in watching, but If it's like absolutely mind blowing or just like a really heartwarming story you think more people should check out, let us know, and we'll watch it and tell you about it. Just like I'm telling you right now to watch Superman and Lois on the CW, even though it's no way connected to Disney Plus. You should definitely watch that because I feel like no one's talking about that show, and it's my favorite live action interpretation of Superman I've ever seen. So check it out, Tristan. I keep telling Tristan to watch it, and he's still on like episode 1. So
Yeah, I mean, look, it's taken me a while to get through it, Joe. But
yeah.
I did mention at the top of the show that I wanted to quickly talk about what I think is the best show on TV right now. And it's something that I recently watched a good amount of. Uh, I think it's a great interpretation of a character that I've cared about for a long time. I binged through all 11 episodes of this show in the course of about 2 days. uh, Despite the terrible quality of the CW app, I've made my way
I have
through
seen you bitching about the CW app on Twitter.
worst app on the internet. I almost gave up on the show. I tried to rewind it because I was like, "Oh, that scene was cool. I'm gonna watch it again." And I rewound it, and it brought me to like the last commercial break, 15 minutes earlier, and I was like, "All right, I guess I'm just gonna watch it from
Yeah,
here."
yeah. I
But like,
tried. I tried to go back and rewatch episodes of Who's Line because they're all on the CW app, and holy fucking shit, is that a pain. But
you
all right,
guys
before
definitely gotta watch
uh,
Superman and Lois.
all right, I will talk to Tristan about Superman and Lois off air because this is not a Superman and Lois recap show. But hey, if we get enough viewership, and maybe by season 2 of Superman and Lois, we will have a Superman and Lois recap show, and I will be very passionate to talk about that. So Tristan, if you don't have anything else to add, I will wish our viewers a good night, or good afternoon, or good morning, or whatever time they're enjoying our content.
Have a good one, guys. Watch Superman and
All right.
Lois. Watch Loki. Watch Monsters at Work. Watch our show. Watch movie Changeup.
All right, yeah, Wednesday we're doing another Forgotten Movies episode. It's me versus Bobby, and I have yet to start writing my pitches, so I'm gonna start on that tonight. I have kind of an idea of what I'm gonna do with some of them, but should be a fun time. Join us Wednesday at 7 right here at twitch.tv/movie changeup.